Herzlich willkommen. Wir sind heute hier im Victory Services Club in London und neben mir sitzt Bradley Harper, Autor von Doktor Doyle jagt, Jack the Ripper. Zu meiner Linken sitzt Dorothee Schröder, die das Werk übersetzt hat. Und da drüben sitzt Jay, what's your last name? Allchin. I didn't want to say that wrong. Ich wollte das nicht falsch sagen. Allchin, thank you. So, Jay Allchin. Jay war der Editor bei Brads Originalversion von The Knife in the Fog. Und er wird gleich ein bisschen über seine Rolle dabei erzählen. Wir fangen mal mit Brad an. Brad ist pensionierter Pathologe der US-Armee und hat sich nach seiner Pensionierung dem Schreiben zugewandt. In seinem ersten Roman, Doktor Doyle jagt, Jack the Ripper, werden der junge Arthur Conan Doyle, Erfinder des legendären Meisterdetektivs Sherlock Holmes, die Autorin Miss Margaret Harkness und Professor Joseph Bell, der als Inspiration für Sherlock Holmes gedient hat, in die Jagd auf Jack the Ripper verwickelt. Das Buch kommt am 7. Oktober im Dryas-Verlag raus, erstmalig auf Deutsch und natürlich nachdem es bereits erfolgreich in der englischsprachigen Welt und auch in Japan veröffentlicht wurde. Und deswegen sage ich, willkommen Professor Dr. Oberst Bradley Harper.
Vielen Dank.
So, we're here today in the wonderful Victory Services Club. Just one thing, obviously I'm talking to Brad in English, but I think our viewers, they understand you. They know enough English to understand what you say. Otherwise, we'll see how we go on. Anyway, we're in the wonderful Victory Services Club in London. Thanks to the club for having us today. Brad, you had a long military career, first as an infantry officer and then as a physician, if I'm correct. So maybe you can start by telling us what inspired you to become a writer after your retirement.
Well, I'm a very boring person. After I retired from the U.S. Army, I don't play golf. I don't have a boat. I don't fly planes. So I had to find something to do. Well, I was always an avid reader, and as a young boy, around 13, I discovered Sherlock Holmes. And I remember I read the entire canon, all the Sherlock Holmes stories, over 2 weeks. I just drank them in, and so I've been a lover of Sherlock Holmes ever since. After I retired, one day I was going through Wikipedia, where all knowledge resides, and I discovered that there was a 4-year gap between the very first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, and the second story, the Sign of Four. So in 1886, Doyle wrote the book, or the story rather. It came out in 87, was a big success, but Doyle only got £25. Doyle wrote short stories for boys' adventure magazines that paid as much or more, and Study in Scarlet is a novella. So he felt so poorly repaid for all that work, he said, writing crime stories is a waste of time. I'll never do another. 1888 was the year of Jack the Ripper, and then ultimately, as I said, 1890, Doyle returns to his great detective. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to write a story that would involve Conan Doyle in the hunt for Jack the Ripper, that would explain why the Ripper was never caught but stopped, and why Doyle eventually returned to writing Sherlock Holmes. So I thought, I'd like to read a book like that, so I decided to write it. And I had no reason to think I could do it. I've always written poetry. I enjoy poetry, but I'd never written any long piece of prose. But I decided the worst thing that would happen is my grammar would improve. And my mother, in fact, was an English teacher at one point, and I gave her an early draft of the novel, and about 2 weeks later, she gave it back to me, all marked up in red. And she looked at me, she said, "Son, didn't I teach you anything?" Well, my grammar did improve over time, and so did my writing. And there you go.
There you go. Obviously, your grammar improved. I was just going to agree. That worked. But there's also maybe something interesting, because my mother is an English teacher too, was an English teacher too, and she happens to sit on the other side of the table. And the both of us, as some of you know, we also wrote a book about Jack the Ripper. In German, it's called Jack the Ripper, die Whitechapel-Morde 1888, eine Chronologie. Es ist ein umfangreiches, faktenbasiertes Sachbuch über Jack the Ripper in deutscher Sprache und wir werden natürlich auch ein wenig darüber sprechen und über die Verbindung zwischen unseren beiden Büchern. Und deswegen vielleicht sagen wir auch mal ganz kurz oder du vielleicht mal an unserer Stelle, wie wir auf das Thema Jack the Ripper gekommen sind.
Ja, den Anfang hast du ja eigentlich gemacht. Du hast dich mit 15 Jahren, glaube ich, das erste Mal mit Jack the Ripper auseinandergesetzt. Wir sind darüber immer wieder mal ins Gespräch gekommen und als wir dann angefangen haben, gemeinsam nach London zu reisen, hat es uns natürlich ins East End und an die Schauplätze der einzelnen Ripper-Morde verschlagen und seitdem ist das Interesse gewachsen. Wir haben uns mit Literatur auseinandergesetzt, wir haben Touren gemacht, Tatorte besichtigt, wir haben recherchiert und ja, du weißt selbst, wir sind gefragt worden, ob es ein Buch in deutscher Sprache gibt, aber vielleicht erzählst du das lieber selber, wie wir dann darauf reagiert haben.
Ja, ich wurde tatsächlich, auch weil ich selbst öfter Touren im East End gegeben habe, irgendwann dann einmal gefragt, ob es gerade von Schülergruppen, ob es dazu ein gutes Buch in deutscher Sprache gibt. Es gibt eins, das allerdings schon einige Jahre alt ist. Und da ich selbst schon mehrere Bücher veröffentlicht habe, du ja auch, ich glaube die meisten von uns hier am Tisch, kam ich dann auf die Idee, ja, das kann ich auch selber schreiben. Und so haben wir letztes Jahr 2023 unser Buch Jack the Ripper, die Whitechapel-Morde 1888 herausgebracht. Was dann wiederum dazu führte, dass wir mit Brad zusammengearbeitet haben, aber dazu kommen wir in einem kleinen Moment. Jay, maybe we can include you now as well, because maybe you can tell us a bit about your role after Brad had written A Knife in the Fog, or your role in the creation of this book. And I'm just going to hand over the microphone maybe to Brad so he can do the interview part now. Thank you.
Here you are interviewing me. I didn't expect that. Yeah, I can't say anything about the creation of it because that's all Brad. It's really serendipity. As a freelance copy editor, I was asked to have a look at the book, and I grabbed it, and I thought, this is good. I think sometimes you, as a reader and as an editor, even as a writer, I think you know you've got something special sometimes from the opening, from the prologue. And I think as a writer, you bookend. And Knife in the Fog is superbly opened and superbly bookended. And I was hooked from the prologue, which is set in 1924, if I recall. 1923. And then Doyle tells us and flashes back to 1888. And I was hooked there. Anything you titled the box, which was the prologue or the epilogue's title, forgive me. It's been a few years since I worked on it. I recently listened to the audio, so I forget the titles. I was hooked straight away. And right, I think I'll have a piece of this. Thank you very much. And I was asked to do a critique of it, and so I wrote Brad some notes and some ideas and some thoughts, and he took that on board. And several months later, he came back with another version of the manuscript. And with some of the ideas that I talked about taken on board. And what I love about working with writers is they take an editor's idea and they improve upon it, and it comes back even better than you'd hoped. And that's what happened, and I was fortunate enough to line edit that and be, I think, fairly early on in the queue to do a bit of editing on that.
And I will pay you for those kind remarks later.
Very well done. Very well done. Good job. Brad, we already have a drink. Take your time. We already talked about, obviously, Arthur Conan Doyle being the protagonist of Doktor Doyle jagt Jack the Ripper, as the German title already says it. But there are two other main protagonists in the book. So one is Professor Joseph Bell, the real-life inspiration for Sherlock Holmes, and the other is Miss Margaret Harkness, who was a writer and socialist living in the East End at that time. Can you tell us a bit about those two, and maybe all three of them, and how you developed these characters, and maybe especially the role of Miss Harkness, because, as we all know, she has meanwhile, she has a very special place in all of our hearts, I think. So maybe you can tell us a bit about the characters.
Well, all three of my main characters were real historic people. As you mentioned, Professor Joseph Bell, he was Doyle's professor of surgery when Doyle was a medical student in Edinburgh. In fact, at one point, Doyle came from a poor family, so to help pave his way through medical school, he was the clerk at one point on Bell's surgical service. And so Bell was famous for his ability to make a diagnosis, especially sometimes a patient would just walk into the room and Bell could diagnose not only their medical problem, where they came from, and what route they may have taken to get to the surgery that day by the stains on their trousers leg. There was one gentleman he diagnosed. Oh, you recently were discharged from the service, and he could tell that because the man was wearing a hat indoors, and that was a military tradition at that time, and so he was. In fact, in the story, at one point, I have Bell do analysis of the handwriting of Jack the Ripper, and Bell did for some forensic cases. After I put that in the story, a year later, I found out that he actually did that, and I thought I'd made it up. So that was, so like, where is the fact and where is the fiction? I tried very closely, to be very close to the actual events, but that was a little bit creepy that I had made that up, and turned out that it was true. Now, Margaret Harkness, she was also a real person. As you mentioned, she was a writer, a suffragette, and a social reformer, and she helped to organize the Match Girls strike that happened the same summer that Jack the Ripper began his spree. And she was living in the Whitechapel area because she wrote about the working poor, and she wanted to live like her characters so she could more accurately portray the lives of the people that she wrote about. So Margaret intrigued me, and the more I learned about her, the more I said, I've got to put her into the story. She, among other things, she was the first woman to be credentialed as a lecturer at the British Museum. I mean, she really was a woman who pressed against the limitations of women in her society. And so when I wish I could say I was clever enough to have done this on purpose, but only after I wrote the book I realized that I had taken Freud's analysis of the human personality and ascribed one aspect to each of my three characters. Now, Doyle is ego, and ego, I don't mean egotistic, but he's very much about the rules. A 5-year-old, the peas cannot touch the carrots on the plate. He had come from a poor family, and his greatest desire at this point in his life is to become a respectable middle-class Englishman. So he's all about having a good reputation and doing everything the proper way. As you know, they say one Englishman is a line waiting to be formed. Now, Bell was a super ego. He understands the needs for rules, but he also understands that sometimes the rules have to be ignored or at least bent to achieve a larger purpose. And then Margaret, bless her heart, is id. She says what she thinks, usually as soon as she thinks it. And she's a type of person we admire, but we usually have to have 2 or 3 shots, strong drinks before we can keep up with her. And it was the mixture of these 3 strong personality types that I think really made for the sum of it was greater than the sum of the parts. The 3 of them together was greater than each individual part by itself. And another thing, because usually dialogue it's like a tennis game. One person says something, the other person responds back and forth. Introducing a third person into the dialogue inherently makes things unbalanced. There's this constant tension. So for the reader not to be confused who's speaking, I had to give each one a very distinct voice and point of view, so it was easy for the reader to follow who's saying what. And so it was a real challenge for me to write, but I enjoyed it. And the more I learned about Margaret, initially she was going to be just a minor character. She was going to introduce Doyle and Bell into the world of Whitechapel, because they're both, proper gentlemen, that this was a new part of society they had little direct contact with. In fact, Charles Dickens referred to this part of London as the abyss. And so, but once he was on the page, just something happened. And there was a spark there in her character. And at one point, my wife, Shree, said, "Why did Margaret say this?" And I said, "I don't know. She just said it." I mean, she began to take over, and it was like she was dictating to me. And that was when I knew that she had to be a major part of the story, and I think it made it much better. I did not want to glorify Jack the Ripper. He was a terrible person, did terrible things, and so Margaret is the voice for the women in that society, the women that suffered. And really, I look at Jack the Ripper as a symptom of the society at that time.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah, I think we agree. We all agree with that. Just one question, Jay. Have you been? I mean, you witnessed the development of the story of the novel. Have you been part of the development of the characters, or did you just witness them grow, if you like?
No, mostly witness. I would like to say otherwise, but mostly witness. Yeah. An editor's job is to acknowledge the flow when it's right, and not to make notes other than affirmative notes for the sake of it. Yeah. And after the first round, where I did have a lot of notes, and the second time when I was doing the line editing, it was really there on the page.
Yeah. Grammar. It was all grammar.
Well, yeah. Well, thankfully I didn't have to worry too much about the grammar, although to my horror there is an American term that has slipped through several drafts that I believe still exists, that shouldn't do. It should have been a British term. I'm not going to say what it is. If anyone can find that out, I don't know how it translates into German, but we'll see. Yeah, I mean, my role was pretty minimal in this. But I did, by being British and also having read Conan Doyle and understanding what Brad was looking to do, at least I thought I did, I felt that I had a good understanding, and I didn't steer him wrong. That's my biggest contribution, is I didn't steer him wrongly.
Dore, Brad hat ja gerade schon ganz passend gesagt, Jack the Ripper was a symptom of the era and the area, both of it. Ist ja so ein bisschen auch der Ansatz von unserem Buch. Möchtest du mal so ein bisschen erzählen, ja, wie wir das Buch angegangen sind und auch, ja, was vielleicht unser Ansatz war bei unserem Buch?
Ja, unser Ansatz war ja eigentlich mal, die Fakten wirklich aufzuzählen und nicht diese ganzen Geschichten, die es inzwischen gibt, zum Besten zu geben, sondern einfach nur mal völlig wertfrei die Fakten darzustellen und jedem selbst zu überlassen, wie er oder sie die Situation beurteilt. Und ich glaube, auf diese Art und Weise gelingt es am besten, sich die Situation im damaligen East End vorzustellen. Ich denke, ich greife Brad jetzt nicht voraus, wenn ich mal sage, dass er in seinem Buch auch sehr genau Margaret Harkness mal erzählen lässt, wie die Lebensumstände im East End waren. Und genau das haben wir ja auch getan. Völlig übervölkert, keine ausreichenden Wohngelegenheiten, keine Arbeitsplätze, Not und Elend, wo man hinschauen konnte. Kinder erreichten, ich glaube, jedes 4. oder 5. starb im Alter von unter 5 Jahren. Also Straßenprostitution war ein unglaubliches Thema, nur damit man überhaupt über die Runden kam. Und wir haben das einfach alles mal zusammengetragen und ein Bild entstehen lassen, das wir aber nicht weiter interpretiert haben. Ich glaube, das wirkt für sich und schiebt auch diesen ganzen Spekulationen und falschen Darstellungen, die es inzwischen gibt, so ein bisschen den Riegel vor. Es gibt ja unendlich viele sogenannte Zeugenaussagen, die sich völlig widersprechen und wo wir also mal genau recherchiert haben, geguckt haben, was gibt es denn, was stimmt denn vielleicht überein. Tatsache ist auch, dass wir nicht viel auf Polizeiberichte zurückgreifen konnten, sondern dass wir eher auf Zeitungsberichte zurückgreifen mussten. Und wir wissen aber auch, dass die Presse gerne etwas dazugedichtet hat, um ihre Auflagen zu erhöhen. Also insgesamt haben wir versucht, das Ganze so neutral wie möglich darzustellen. Und ich glaube, das ist uns gut gelungen, ne?
Das glaube ich auch, zumindest durch das von dem Feedback auch, was wir bisher bekommen haben. Das Buch gibt es jetzt knapp über ein Jahr und sie haben ein sehr gutes Feedback bekommen. And I'm going to switch to English now so that we can all speak in the same language and understand each other. And we asked Brad to write a short testimonial for our book, which he did. And I think that was kind of the spark for the idea that you asked me to be your agent for your German agent for the German market, to have A Knife in the Fog published in Germany, which I did successfully. Obviously, thank you. It's gonna be released at Dryas-Verlag, at the publisher Dryas-Verlag, on 7th of October 2024. But the success wouldn't be there without Dorothee's translation, which she managed to capture Brad's voice and that of his characters. Sorry. Maybe you can tell us a bit, maybe in English now. What was it like to translate this book and put Brad's voice into another language? And maybe you can tell us a bit about the translation of A Knife in the Fog, aka Doktor Doyle jagt the Ripper.
Yes, it wasn't that easy in the very beginning. I asked myself how to do it. And first of all, I read the book once again. I'd already read it before, but I read it once again with a special look on it. And then I realized that Brad had taken this kind of Dr. Watson's telling, and then I read Sherlock Holmes again, and I saw, yes, that's it. So my task is to transport this into the German language, and I think it worked. I think it worked very, very well.
It did, I agree. And I know Brad asked you, I'm not sure if there's an answer, but I'm going to pass on the question, or the two questions. What did you learn and what surprised you?
What did I learn? I learned that the English we learn is very different from the kind of literary experience, literary telling. And it was a new experience for me as well, although I've read a lot of English books, but I've never tried to find someone's voice to tell something. So that was a great experience. It was a surprise for me to find out that it worked so well, because in the very beginning I thought, well, it's an experience. You never know what's coming out, but it worked. So
it did, and it worked so well that the sequel of A Knife in the Fog, Queen's Gambit, will also be published by Dryas-Verlag, by the publisher Dryas, next year, in the spring of 2024. So I can 25. I can proudly say that they asked for it before we pitched it to them, which was our initial idea. Like, once Dr. Doyle is out, we're going to pitch Queen's Gambit for them, and they asked for it before it came out. So I think we all did a pretty good job. Yeah. Maybe one thing before we go to Queen's Gambit, maybe you can tell us a few sentences about A Knife in the Fog in Japan, because that's quite a big story too, right?
Oh yes, Sherlock Holmes is huge in Japan. They teach the Sherlock Holmes stories in the gymnasium in Japan as a means of teaching logic to the students. So almost everyone in Japan at one point or another has read at least a couple of Sherlock Holmes stories. And the Sherlock Holmes Society of Japan is very large, and they built a statue in honor of Professor Bell that stands today in Edinburgh. So yeah, it's huge over there. So when I was, A Knife in the Fog was a finalist for the Edgar Award for Best First Novel by an American in 2019. So I went to the awards ceremony and got to walk down the red carpet, and sit next to very famous authors, and that was quite an experience. A gentleman at my table was from Japan with Hayakawa Publishing, and he was very asking me a lot of questions about my book, and so they published A Knife in the Fog, and it was published over there, and I understand it's done quite well. So this is the second foreign language now that that book has been translated into. So I'm quite pleased with that, especially for a debut novel.
Absolutely, yeah. We already mentioned that Queen's Gambit is going to be published next year in Germany, and I can say that Brad's wife just passed a piece of paper over asking what's the German name for Queen's Gambit going to be. And we kind of decided together with the publisher, we exchanged some ideas, and I think the working title now, which will probably be the final title, is Miss Harkness und das Damen-Gambit. So it's in tradition of Doktor Doyle jagt Jack the Ripper, it's like Miss Harkness und das Damen-Gambit. I thought so too, yeah, I like the idea. So yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit about Queen's Gambit, aka Miss Harkness und das Damen-Gambit. What's this novel about?
All right, well, in this one, Margaret is the main character. And there's a very famous book that came out in 1973 called Day of the Jackal. It's about an attempted political assassination of Charles de Gaulle. And it was an excellent book. And I thought, well, why don't I recast that story in Victorian England and make Queen Victoria the target and make Miss Harkness the person who's trying to stop the assassination. The people trying to kill the Queen, they want to do it during the procession of her Diamond Jubilee as a means to precipitate a war in Europe in hopes it would bring down the ruling aristocracies. So Margaret, my assassin, is the younger brother of a man who was involved in the assassination of Tsar Alexander, and so his older brother and his lover, they send him off to Germany to escape the secret police, and so he is kind of duped into becoming the assassin. He doesn't really want to kill the Queen, but unfortunately the anarchists have a hold over him. So I want the reader to be sympathetic to him. He's not a bad guy, but you don't want him to succeed, but you have some empathy for him. And then there's Margaret, of course, and she begins working with an inspector from Scotland Yard. There was a section of Scotland Yard called Special Branch. And the Special Branch, their job was to basically counterintelligence. I think the modern equivalent is MI5 in the British Secret Service today, and they were there to track foreign spies in the United Kingdom. And so she's working with him. And he has a young daughter. He's a widower. He has a 15-year-old daughter named Elizabeth, and she looks up to Margaret. And not having a mother anymore, Margaret becomes a mentor to her. And in fact, there's a scene I'm rather proud of, where her father finds out that his daughter hasn't been going to school, and he says, "What have you been doing?" "Oh, I've been out in the streets." "Doing what?" Studying for my true profession." And he says, "What's that?" "Oh, I want to be a detective." And he just about collapses. And so anyway, so she looks to Margaret as a role model, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Jay, have you worked on Queen's Gambit too? Haven't you?
Everybody wants to work with Brad, so I didn't work with him on that book now.
Okay, yeah. But you did, Dorothee, or you are going to do it, because obviously you're gonna translate Miss Harkness und das Damen-Gambit too, just like you did with Dr. Doyle. Obviously because you captured Brad's voice so well. So what do you expect from translating this book, and what's it going to be like this time?
In German or in English?
As you like. Maybe in English, so okay. we all understand what.
Now we understand how wonderful the book is.
Right.
Well, it is.
We can do two answers, one in German, one in English.
Well, I don't want to say too much in advance. I think it's a very interesting story. I've already read it, and I know there are some things Brad has still to explain me so that I can translate it properly. I don't want to tell anything now. I think that would be the correct time now. It's going to be a wonderful book, and that's all I want to say now.
Okay. I think the result's going to be wonderful too. So, let's see. Oh, yeah. Before we finish our little interview, let's just go on and maybe you can tell our readers if you're working on any other projects right now, or write any books that deal with similar historical themes, or if you write in general right now.
Okay, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I just finished a revision of a manuscript. I did a one-year creative writing program, master's program at Napier University at Edinburgh, and finished that in 2022 in Scotland. And my thesis project involves an art heist aboard the Titanic. There was an all-female criminal organization in London called the 40 Elephants. And they called themselves that because they operated out of a pub called the Elephant and Castle. So the leader at the time was a woman named Mary Carr, who was also an artist model. She modeled for some very famous artists at her time. And then I have two of her compatriots are on board the Titanic to steal a painting that was by the artist Blondel, a very famous painting that was in fact on board the ship. And opposing them is a young man named Harry Worth. Harry Worth was the son of Adam Worth. Adam Worth was the inspiration for Professor Moriarty. He was a consulting criminal. He would plan bank robberies, among other things. He would get 15% of the whatever that gang got from the theft. He had a mansion. He had a steam yacht. He had racing horses. He certainly put the lie to the saying that crime does not pay. It paid very well for him for many years, until ultimately he was caught at a bank heist. And when he came out of prison, he was very poor and bad health. And he had a painting he'd stolen years ago that Pinkertons had been trying to recover. So he contacted William Pinkerton, the head of the agency at that time, and said, I tell you what I'll do. You can have the painting for $25,000, a promise that I will not be prosecuted. And when my son comes of age, I want you to make him a Pinkerton agent, because I do not want my son to follow me into a life of crime. Well, Pinkerton respected Adam Worth, because Adam Worth never used violence in his crimes. He said if a man had a set of brains, he could do whatever without harming someone physically. So Pinkerton agreed with that. So I have the son of a master criminal opposing these three female criminals. And, of course, there's a spark of romance between one of them and Harry. Of course, it's the Titanic, of course. And anything, their plans, of course, go awry when the ship hits the iceberg. And so it was a lot of fun writing, a lot of fun doing the research, and I put in little vignettes of some of the famous people that were on board. One of the things that surprised me, everyone talks about the unsinkable Molly Brown. Mm-hmm. Well, Mrs. Brown, among other things, boxed for fitness, and so I have her use her boxing skills at one point.
Okay. Looking forward to reading that. Maybe before we finish off, maybe we can tell our audience why we're here in the first place. I mean, we are in London, obviously, but maybe you can tell us what's happening right now.
Well, yesterday and tomorrow, I'll be at a 19th century mortuary. A small production company is making a movie based upon a short script I wrote using my three characters in A Knife in the Fog. And we'll be entering that into festivals. The director read the book, loved it, said he thought it would make a great movie. So the movie we're making will be about 12 minutes long, and we'll use it as a proof of concept to help pitch the book to various production companies and hope that someone wants to do something more. Our concept, the way I'm pitching it, is to be similar to the BBC series Sherlock, 3 to 4 episodes to have the entire story told that way. And I'm frankly just blown away by the performances of my three actors, especially the young lady playing Margaret Harkness. She really has captured the fire of Miss Harkness, and her name is Lauren Cornelius, and she's in the BBC radio program Doctor Who. She voices one of the characters, Dodo Chaplet. She's been in, of course, other things as well, but she is just an amazing actress, and she really gave me a great compliment yesterday. She had a copy of A Knife in the Fog, and she asked me for my autograph. And I told Cherie, I said, a beautiful young actress has asked me for my autograph, and I will be insufferable for several days.
I understand that. Yeah. Brilliant. So you can probably you can watch this show in the future. I'm very optimistic that something good's going to happen from that, going to come from that.
Yeah, we're calling the film Leviathan.
Yes, right. I saw the script, so yeah, Leviathan. We'll keep you updated about the book. About the film and the upcoming series. Okay, thank you very much, lady, gentlemen. I'm going to switch to German now for our audiences once again. Brads Buch Doktor Doyle jagt Jack the Ripper wird in Deutschland am 7. Oktober 2024 im Dryas-Verlag erscheinen. An dieser Stelle auch herzlichen Dank an Sandra Thoms vom Dryas-Verlag, die das Projekt betreut und auch das Nachfolgeprojekt Miss Harkness und das Damen-Gambit betreut. Und unser Buch Jack the Ripper, die Whitechapel-Morde 1888, eine Chronologie, wurde letztes Jahr veröffentlicht und ist überall im Buchhandel und in Online-Shops erhältlich. Am besten ist natürlich die Kombination, einmal die Romanversion von Bradley und bei uns die Fakten und die Hintergründe.
Do you want to say anything about the short story?
Yes, why not? Let's add something about the short story.
All right. The publisher also bought a short story that features Margaret in her final years. I won't say too much about it, but I understand the publisher will be selling that as an ebook and also perhaps as a promotional item. So those, I hope the many future fans of Miss Harkness will find that an additional story to enjoy.
I'm waiting for her appearance on the Titanic. Who knows? Oh, okay, sorry. All right. Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you very much, Dorothee. Thank you very much, Cherie. You don't see her. And thank you very much, Kate, behind the camera. As I said, Doktor Doyle jagt Jack the Ripper is out on October 7th, 2024 at Dryas-Verlag. And we're going to enjoy this day and the rest of the weekend with the film shoot. Thank you very much.